Talking today in our Expats of Nicaragua WhatsApp group, which you should join, by the way, go check our show notes for a link. We were talking about why it's so difficult for standard businesses that people are so interested in here in Nicaragua to get traction. Of course, we talk about these business ideas all the time, but there's a little bit different perspective that we take each time. And today we came up with another way of talking about why it's so difficult. And that is by looking at the Nicaraguan economy as a pie, which is a normal thing for looking at business ideas. So let's talk about pies and the Nicaraguan economy right after the bump. When it comes to Nicaragua and its economy, there's two important parts of the pie perspective that we should be looking at. One is the entire economy. Nicaragua as an economy is a very small pie, and I don't think a lot of people coming to Nicaragua really understand just how small that pie is when it comes to the amount of money they may be able to move. Of course, if you're a Nicaraguan and living in Nicaragua, the way that you perceive the economy is very different. You're worried about the ability to move products, get food, keep shelter, and so forth, and you don't really care too much, or as much as a foreigner does, about the actual amount of money that may move around within the system. You don't need actual money in many cases. You just need electric and heat and air conditioning and fans and mangoes and avocados and toast and so forth, right? You need the accoutrements of life, but you don't actually need money per se. Of course, everyone needs money. Everybody needs to buy things. We're not saying you don't. What we're saying is that the focus is different. But when you're a foreigner and you're looking to invest in an economy, you're really just looking to compare how much money you can make from an investment in one place versus an investment in another. So when you're looking at an economy like the United States, where money moves everywhere and everything is focused on money, then you have one perspective. When you come to Nicaragua, you're going to be faced with another one. And so while you may look at Nicaragua and say, wow, the quality of life and such is so great, we know that it's a poor country. We know that there's many people who are financially struggling and a lot of people can't go buy things. We understand that. But when we're looking at it as a whole, we still feel like it's a big country with a lot going on. Drive around the country and you see high rises and businesses and activity going on all the time. There's all this economy. It must have a lot of money and there must be lots of opportunities. If we were doing the same thing somewhere in the United States and you're driving around, you would see all this economic activity going on in a given state, for example, and it would never occur to you that it was just way too small. But if you were to actually take the entire Nicaraguan economy and multiply it out by all the people, it's first of all a very small country, just under 7 million people. And the average GDP per person is around 22 to 2,500 US dollars per person. This fluctuates obviously a little bit, and it's not a great figure. It's very meaningless. But when you multiply that out, the total size of the economy isn't very big. And in fact, the United States economy fluctuates in how big it is by the entire Nicaraguan economy, literally minute by minute. So it's very difficult for an American to comprehend just how small the complete Nicaraguan market is. That doesn't mean that it's bad. It just means that our view of it is often skewed. We're used to 7 million people having a much larger economic impact and ability to generate wealth. So when we're investing in a place like Nicaragua, it's often very misleading. So when we're looking at the United States, we're looking at a very big pie. The economy is huge, the largest in the world, or it was. That's probably not true anymore. And when we're looking at Nicaragua, we're looking at an extremely tiny pie, far from the smallest in the world. It's neither the poorest country per person, nor is it the smallest country or anything of the sort. So if you were to compare it to, say, Belize, it is a much larger economy. But if you're comparing it to the United States, it's a drop in the bucket. So the overall size of the Nicaraguan pie of economy is a very small pie. But when we're looking as expats, we're moving into the country, we're typically only looking at a very small subset of the general economy. We're not realistically, and there are exceptions, but we're not generally looking at opening mines. We're not looking at opening factories. We're not looking at opening engineering centers. We're not looking at opening universities. We're not looking at opening trucking companies and so forth. We're not looking at large businesses normally. We're looking at things that are relatively small, but not absolutely tiny. We're not looking at pulperias and things that people are operating out of their houses, which represents the largest number of businesses in Nicaragua. So there's a super huge number of those absolutely tiny 1- and 2-person businesses that often are less than full-time work even for a single person and don't have a physical presence outside of someone's home. They just operate out of the living room, for example. These kinds of things are the base of the general economy. Where foreigners tend to be looking is in a very small subset of relatively unique businesses that mostly are centered around tourism and mostly are in the food and hospitality space, where they have 1 to maybe 20 employees, and that's it. Nothing bigger, nothing smaller. And it's important, smaller wouldn't make sense for investors. Larger is often just something that people aren't interested in. However, when we talk about real opportunities in the Nicaraguan market, generally we're talking about places that are larger than that, right? It is things like factories and major businesses is where big opportunity typically lies. The opportunity in the hospitality space, while it's not non-existent, is extremely difficult because it is a segment that is not heavily needed in the country. It is not a segment that the government heavily focuses on, but it is one that is very visible and accessible to foreigners. So we're taking a country with a very small pie, and then we're looking at a very small subset of that pie. So the pie of the economy that foreigners are looking at is itty bitty. It is so small. And when we're looking at this tiny little pie, even if you were to have the entire tourism economy of Nicaragua, it would represent far less money than many hospitality businesses in the United States generate as a single entity, let alone spread out amongst all of the thousands of foreign investors and thousands of local investors here in Nicaragua. Now, of course, when you're in the United States, the number of people who are investing into the economic pie of that same subset of the economy is many-fold larger than is here in Nicaragua. That goes without saying. But the pie is so many times larger than that difference that the amount that is available for each person is many times as much. Your potential slice of the American pie is much larger than the slice of the Nicaraguan pie, to the point, like I said, if you're the Hilton or the Marriott or Intercontinental Hotels, each of them likely has a slice of the American tourist economy larger than the Nicaraguan tourist economy. That's really important to understand, that we're dealing with tiny slices. Now, you may be making a tiny investment and it may be just fine for you. But when you're considering whether or not you can make enough to make your investment make sense, often people are thinking, well, I'm going to invest hardly anything and somehow I'm going to make a living wage. If this was true, and we say this a lot in these videos, then every Nicaraguan would go out and do that. They don't, because it doesn't work that way. You need to make big investments to make big income, just like in the United States. Now, the amount you need to survive on here is much lower, so there are benefits. But if in the United States you need to earn, let's just say, $100,000 per year to be happy with the results from a business, that's the income from the business, then you may need to invest $1 million to get that return. If you needed to get that same $100,000 here in Nicaragua, you would need to invest more than $1 million because the economy is more difficult, you have more challenges, and it is a lower return rate than the United States under normal circumstances. So you may need to invest somewhere between $110,000 and $150,000 to get that same rate of return, or the same total return out of Nicaragua. Now, if you're living in Nicaragua, you don't need $100,000 if that's what you needed in the United States. If that's what you need in the United States, you probably need closer to $35,000 to live just as well or better here in Nicaragua. I guarantee it would be better, but there will be a few things that will have been, it's not always comparable, but in overall quality of life, $35,000 in Nicaragua will feel better than $100,000 in the United States almost all the time. So because of that, we don't need to make the investment of, and I'm sorry, I said the numbers wrong, not 150,000, 1.1 to 1.5 million to get that 100,000 in Nicaragua. We don't need that much because we need roughly 1/3 as much. So our investment would still need to be about $400,000 to $500,000 in order to get that $35,000 return if we were to match that $1 million to slightly more investment in the United States to get that $100,000 return. So while you may earn only 1/3 as much, only need 1/3 as much, you'll need to invest half as much to get that. That's not a great rate of return when you're looking at the big picture, and you still need to put a lot in to get that amount out. Or, like I said, Nicaraguans would be doing it left and right, and they'd be living off of that, and you would not be able to compete with them. Your challenge here is coming up with a way to compete against the local market. We've got plenty of videos to go into that. We don't need to go into depth. What's important here is what we're talking about is that the size of the pie that you're competing for is tiny. And so any slice that you're able to get represents potentially a large portion of that pie, but that slice may be outrageously small. And that makes for big challenges. We're moving a little bit to hopefully get a little bit better light here because the sun is getting very low, but I wanted to get this video out today, so I apologize for the movement. With that tiny pie, you have to fight very, very hard because there are so many people who want to get in on that action. And this is where one of the biggest challenges comes in. Yes, the biggest challenge is just how small that pie is overall. Nothing is bigger than how small it is, right? How big, how small? Okay. But when you're in the United States, the number of people you will meet in your everyday life who are trying to get in on a specific economic component, such as hospitality within a region, is relatively small. You go to a small town. I'm from nearby to Geneseo, New York. You go to Geneseo, New York, and you can go around town, and there's a certain number of restaurants, there's a certain number of hotels and so forth in a village of about 15,000 people. If you were to come to a similar sized village here in Nicaragua, you would generally find a number of expats and some locals who are trying to do the same thing with maybe double or triple the number of restaurants, more hotels, more Airbnbs, and so forth. They're taking a tiny economy with really low returns and trying to invest at higher rates, right? Meaning, if you were to go to Geneseo, there might be, let's say, 20 restaurants in town. If you do the same thing here in Nicaragua, you might find that there are 30, mostly being opened up by expats who are sure that somehow, magically, there will be money. But instead of putting in big restaurants with big investments, they're trying to do so on a fraction of the investment they would do in the United States. That's part of the charm. But then they're magically expecting that their returns will not just be at the rate of the United States, but will somehow return the absolute number of the United States without having to make the equivalent investment. Meaning, if in the United States you had to put in $1 million to get a $100,000 return, they often think they can come here, put in a $250,000 investment, and still get a $100,000 return per year. That's insane. If that existed, every investor in the world would instantly identify Nicaragua as a magic market and invest locally until such opportunities didn't exist anymore. That's how the playing field gets leveled across the world so that those kinds of things don't exist. Return rates on investment stay relatively close around the world because as soon as there is a opportunity for arbitrage, those who are savvy investors will get right in on that and take advantage of that until it goes away. Same thing with Forex trading. This is why the Canadian dollar can only get so much different than the euro or the US dollar, and as they move, people will trade them, and if there's an opportunity for arbitrage, it will level the playing field within seconds normally because people take advantage of that algorithmically. That's not going to happen between countries. It's a little bit slower, but you're still looking at months, not decades, for that to adjust. So if such an opportunity existed anywhere in the world, it would be preyed on very, very quickly. And for example, those of us who are local here in Nicaragua would have investments. We would see those rates of return. We would invest everything we have back into the economy to take advantage of that more and more. And we would go to places like the United States and get loans and get investors and come back and do it more and more and provide insane, impossible rates of return and get paid literally billions of dollars by hedge funds to make that happen. That doesn't happen because it can't. It's not possible. So people have this completely magic picture of thinking that they're going to come to a place that has to have low rates of return, has to be a tiny, tiny pie, that they're going to go into a tiny overrun subset of that pie and do the same thing that everyone is doing. So the number of slices we're trying to take out of that tiny pie is abnormally high. And that's really what we want to get across. Not only is the pie small, but we're cutting it into way too many slices. So when we're going to the beach here in Nicaragua, for example, you may need to have 1 or 2 hotels. You may need to have 3 or 4 restaurants. But what we find is 10 or 20 hotels and 50 restaurants, and none of them can make any money because each of them is getting such a tiny slice of the pie that they can't earn enough return to cover their costs. But the property values don't reflect that there's no value in the investment because people do want them potentially as homes. So that keeps the property value higher, so that you have to put in a certain amount of investment for a business that may not be able to return anything at all. You could put $100,000 into opening a restaurant on the beach and then find that you're not able to attract any customers at all. And that investment isn't going to return 10%. It could return negative 10% as you bleed out every year because you still have to have employees. You still have to have a stock. And if you're not prepared for that, you could be losing money on something that you thought was going to pay your bills because you didn't think about the fact that the slice that you were going to get is so small, it may be zero. Even if it's not a particularly bad business, there just isn't enough business going around. And so that's something that it's so easy to think that the pie is unlimited in size. You just build it and they will come, but they don't exist. And other people have been building it and they did go. right? They already have those customers. You're trying to take those customers away from someone else. Every new restaurant has to make its money by taking the people from some other restaurant. Every hotel has to take its business from some other hotel. There isn't a backlog of people looking for hotels or looking for seats in restaurants that don't exist. In the United States, there are areas where you have to get reservations hours, days, even weeks in advance, and it's widespread. Now, there's going to be some food available, but a lot of the restaurants that people want may be booked out. If you watch TV, they make this seem like much more common than it is. But in places like New York or Seattle or Los Angeles, it is easy for popular restaurants to be booked up long in advance. Here in Nicaragua, it's unheard of. You do not, the idea of making reservations basically doesn't exist. Few exceptions, yes, but in general, it doesn't exist. You walk into restaurants, there's almost always tables available. When there isn't, you just wait a little bit or go to a different restaurant. There's always some place with tables. So by adding a new restaurant, you're not going to create more demand and have more people come out to eat. You're simply going to, if you're lucky, attract people that were already going to go to one of those other restaurants. Same thing with hotels. Basically, nothing is ever sold out. And when they are, it's just like Semana Santa, and everyone's sold out because there's unlimited demand, but it's for only less than 2 weeks of the year. It's not enough to make a real difference in the fortunes of any businesses. So by knowing that there just isn't additional demand going on, unless you have a way to create new demand, which is a really unique thing and not something that normal people are able to do, not even close to normal people, right? It's the 1% are able to create new demand for a market. Unless you have that and have some special sauce that's going to bring in people that no one else has brought in before, you're simply taking a very small pie that is already cut into impossibly small slices and trying to get another slice carved out of what little bit everyone else is already struggling to eat off of. So that is why the pie of Nicaragua being so small and so many investors as a ratio trying to get in on that action creates a major problem. When you think of it that way, it becomes very clear why it's essentially impossible to make any money at that. And if you do make money at that, you are guaranteeing that many other people, not just one, not just two, but very likely if you were to have a successful restaurant or a successful hotel, you are likely to put out of business 4 or 5 or 20 other businesses that you took their tiny failing slices and accumulated them to have one business that is making a reasonable amount of profit. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. Remember, every coffee doesn't just help me make the show possible. It also adds to the Nicaraguan economy because that money comes here and I spend it here on things, and that helps make the pie just a little bit bigger. And as always, if you'd like to get into our show notes, check out any way to contact me, get on our social media, send in your own questions by video, please. That's awesome. Or get in the comments, say hello, whatever. We love it when you guys engage. Remember to check out our WhatsApp group. Remember to join us on Thursdays for our live stream and share on social media, pop it on Facebook or whatever. Tell someone about the show, we talk about everything here, right? We cover all the things you need to know about moving abroad, Latin America, Nicaragua, investing, buying a house, you name it, it's all here. We're going to get out and go to Matagalpa. I'm in Matagalpa while this is airing, and I will see all of you tomorrow.